Jackie Cooper.
Ben Norris.
Carrie Hahn.
Amy Trost.
Richard Davila.
We certify that we have a quorum. Moving to item C, approval of the minutes of February 26, 2016.
I move to approve the minutes as written.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So carried. Okay, we go to item number D, or letter D, public comment. Any person wishing to address the advisory board? We have no public comment. Okay, we'll move to agenda E, item E, staff reports. We'll hear first from the executive office.
Good morning. My name is Mary Winston, and I'll be presenting the Executive Office Staff Report. Item A is an update and discussion regarding the transition of this program from DSHS to TDLR. Wanted you to know that things are moving forward. Internally, we're working with DSHS staff on software conversion. Our licensing staff is working with DSHS. We're also moving forward towards hiring. We've hired several people. We've plucked, and we will continue to probably pluck some of the employees from DSHS to help this be a seamless transition for the October 3rd official transition date. We had great participation in our external strategic planning. I believe in every city we had someone to show up from your program to represent and ask questions. Mr. Davila, I know, was in Lubbock, I believe. We broke it up with each set of employees handling 3 or 4 cities, and we had great participation. For those of you who don't know what our external strategic planning incorporates, go to several cities throughout the state, and we ask the same questions every time. What are we doing well? What can we do better? If you were king, queen, dictator for a day, dictator's my thing, what would you change? And lastly, in 5 years, what changes do you see that will affect the way you practice or the way we do business? We took all of those public comments, we wrote down whatever they said, we took those notes. We had comments that ranged from the very polite to the very not polite, but whatever it was, we wanted to hear it because that's why we're out there, and we took it all down. All of those public comments are now posted on our website for the public to review and at your leisure for you to review. We also posted these same questions on Twitter and on our Facebook page, and we've accepted these responses via email. The public's comments from those social mediums are also posted on our website, so we can kind of get an idea of what the public feels should happen, what you professionals in your field think about the transition, or what should happen, or what can affect your license in the next several years, be that technology or political climate or whatever, health, so forth and so on, and how can TLR help effectuate and make it better. We want to thank you for the work on the rules. The commission approved the proposed rules that were worked on, and they were approved unanimously at the commission meeting. Our commission has recently gone through a change. 2 of our longtime commissioners have left the commission, Mr. Fred Moses and Ms. Luann Morgan, and 2 new commissioners have been appointed, Mr. Rick Figueroa and Ms. Helen Collier. Internally, we've also had a major staff change. Our director, Mr. Bill Kuntz, submitted for resignation effective August 31st of this year, and it was accepted by our commission, so Bill is resigning at the end of August. The commission also hired, selected Mr. Brian Francis to be the new director of the agency. So how does this affect you guys? It's a pretty good call. You've gone through a lot of changes, and it's an excellent call. You will continue to go through smoothly towards that October 3rd date. Bill is out of town, and Brian is in town, but we suddenly lost one of our employees last week, and his services are today. So that's Mr. David Harris, a very, very sweet man. And so Brian was here earlier, but he did leave to attend Mr. Harris's funeral services. If there are no further questions, that concludes the executive report.
Thank you. Okay, now we'll hear from Compliance Division.
Compliance Division Director is out of town as well for work. And I'm just going to briefly read the very short report into the record. We have staff updates with the Compliance Division interviewed several applicants for the manager position for the new health professions section of the Compliance Division, and they selected Stephen Mills. I believe several of you are familiar with Stephen. He's from DSHS, Department of State Health Services, and he was hired to oversee staff and operations of this new section. Mr. Mills will begin his duties on June 1st. For public outreach, compliance staff plans to represent the agency at the Texas Hearing Aid Association Annual Convention and Southwest Regional Trade Show in Dallas on June 3rd and 4th. And for upcoming projects, Stephen, once he gets over here, and George Ferry, who's the Director of Compliance, will be conducting more interviews. They have 5 more positions that they need to fill within the Compliance Division's Health Professions section, and you may see some additional familiar faces. And that's the compliance report for today.
Thank you. Now we'll hear from Education and Examination Division.
Good morning, Chairman and Advisory Board members. My name is Rebecca Armas, and I'm with the Education Examination Division. Just wanted to give you a few brief updates. We have hired 2 new members to our team. We have Frances Mendieta Pringle, who comes with us with a vast experience with exams, so she'll be assisting us in the examination process. And we also have Jerry Gonzalez, who is providing a wealth of information regarding some DSHS programs. He comes from us from DSHS. On one of the pages here, I wanted to just share with you is kind of a snapshot of one of the reports that you'll be receiving from us, and that is the statistics for continuing education. It kind of gives you a breakdown of how many courses we approve, how many are issued per month, and this is just for to give you, again, a snapshot of our electrician program. This will be specific to your program once we start the process of approving and issuing course numbers. Another report that's not on here that you will be seeing is the pass-fail rate for your practical examination that we will be administering. And to go along that note, we will be meeting today with some subject matter and experts in the industry to review the exam in preparation for the October 3rd transfer. And that is all I have.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Licensing Division.
Good morning. My name is Dee Dee McKeecher. I'm the Director of Licensing here at TDLR, and I want to introduce you to Leonard Rivas. He is the new licensing manager that we hired for the Department of State Health Services to process these license applications. We have been going over there to the Department of State Health Services every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, and we'll continue that throughout the summer. We are learning how to process their applications and helping them get caught up on backlog and figuring out which employees we would like to borrow, come down the road, or steal, I should say. We're not borrowing. But so we are actively learning and finding out what's going on and how things are done. We're also getting an exposure to their licensing system that will be brought over as well. So we are learning that at the same time. Leonard has 22 years of experience in licensing at the Department of State Health Services, so he knows what he's doing. And so we're very glad to have him.
All right, any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, now we'll hear from the Department of State Health Services.
Good morning. I'm Katie Bryce with Department of State Health Services. We held a complaints subcommittee meeting and a full committee meeting May 18th in Austin. This was followed by the practical exam administration on Wednesday and Thursday. We had 41 candidates slated to test over those 2 days. A problem we ran into frequently was candidates presenting an audiometer calibration certificate with a typed name instead of a signature. A signed calibration certificate is required, so this caused some delays and complications with testing. We will work to educate the trainers and candidates before the next administration of the practical exam to try to solve that problem. The next practical exam was scheduled for September 26th. Logistically, this wasn't possible because of the proximity to the transfer date. So the committee voted to move the test date to August 30th and 31st. This still may be moved because we were notified that several proctors will be unavailable on those dates. But if it moves, it will be sometime either the week before or after that week of August 30th. I'll be attending the Texas Hearing Aid Association Conference June 3rd and 4th in Dallas. And currently, we have 116 temporary training permit holders and 674 combined full license holders and apprentice permit holders. Are there any questions?
As far as the meeting or the proctoring on August 30th, 31st, if it changes, are you going to send out emails and try to?
We'll send an email out to the committee members and try to get a consensus on what dates would work best.
Okay, thank you. Any other question?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move to item F, decisions and possible action recommendations, approval for criminal conviction guidelines.
Morning, board members. My name is Ken Sharp. I'm an attorney with the Enforcement Division. I noticed that all the presentations up to now have been pretty short and sweet, and that comes to a grinding halt right now. I've got a little bit more for you that we'll talk about. We're going to talk about the criminal conviction guidelines for hearing instrument fitters and dispensers, and we'll talk about the origin of those criminal conviction guidelines, why we have them, what benefits they provide, not only to TDLR and to the industry, but also to the public, to license applicants and so forth. And we'll see how they're used in licensing. We'll also talk about how these particular guidelines were developed. I mean, some of you already know because you're on the work group. But then we'll examine and discuss the proposed guidelines, and at the end, we hope that you'll recommend that these guidelines be approved by the Commission of Licensing and Recommendation. So, having said that, we'll get started. The requirements for the criminal conviction guidelines originates with a statute, as with all this legal stuff. Section 53.025 in the Texas Occupations Code requires licensing authorities to compile a list of crimes that directly relate to licensed occupations. Now, they also require that the licensing authority explain why those crimes on that list relate to those occupations. So that's what our criminal conviction guidelines do. Simply put, it's a list of crimes that may affect a person's eligibility for an occupational license and the reasons why it may affect that eligibility. Excuse me. And before we get too far along, we should note that there are other reasons for denying a license or revoking a license. The basic guidance for us has always come from Section 53.021A, and I hate to see people's eyes glaze over when I talk numbers, but it's kind of important to keep that frame of reference. 53.021A in the Occupations Code is our basic authorization for the denial and revocation of license. It has 4 parts, if my math is right, 4 parts. And I'm going to skip the first one for right now. We'll come back and talk about that in just a minute. So we'll talk about the second one, and that second one is for non-guideline crimes, crimes that don't appear on these guidelines that we're going to talk about in a minute. But they were committed within 5 years prior to the person applying for the license. That's one basis for a denial or revocation. Number 3 on that list is what we call 3G offenses, and it comes from the section in the Code of Criminal Procedure where we find it. And those 3G offenses are the especially serious crimes, the really bad ones like murder and armed robbery and indecency with a child and things like that. Aggravated sexual assault, any felony that involves the use of a deadly weapon. Those are those especially serious ones. Now, we may have some of those crimes on our guidelines, but just because we have that overlap doesn't mean that, well, I should say, even if we didn't have that overlap, we could still use this as a basis for denying or revoking a license, even if it's not on our criminal conviction guideline list. The fourth category is the sexually violent offenses. And these, again, they're very serious ones, but they also have a sexual element in them. Indecency with a child, sexual assault, aggravated sexual assault, aggravated kidnapping with intent to violate the victim sexually, and so forth. It's, again, a very bad crime, but with that sexual element in it. And with the third one we talked about, it may or may not be on our guideline offenses. But if it's not on there, it doesn't matter. We can still use this as an independent basis for denying or revoking a license. There's another list of reasons for denying or revoking a license that you folks may be a little more familiar with, and that's in section 402.501 of the Occupations Code, the one that the hearing instrument fitters and dispensers typically deal with. Is there an acronym for that, hearing instrument fitters and dispensers, or is that just, everybody just says the whole thing? Say the whole thing? Okay.
Hearing aid dispensers.
Well, I'm a lawyer and I talk a lot, so I'm okay with that. But I just didn't know if it would make it be more comfortable for others if there was a shorthand version.
I think fitters would be fine.
Okay, fitters, all right, we'll go with that. Well, anyway, in 402.501, that's a pretty comprehensive list of reasons for denying or revoking a license. And it ranges from that general standard of harm to the public to more specific standards like giving or receiving a rebate without having earned it, or hiring a person to be a fitter without being licensed, or when that person is not licensed. Most prominent on that list for our discussion here today is in subsection 3, and that's the one that refers to a conviction for a crime that's directly related to the practice of fitting and dispensing hearing instruments. That term, directly related, is significant. It's pretty important. And that brings us back around to the first reason. You remember we were talking about that 53.021A and those 4 reasons? We skipped the first one. We're going to go back to that now. That one provides us with the authority to deny or revoke a license if the person was convicted for a crime that's directly related to the occupation for which a license is required. That's where we get this list that's required by state law that we talked about earlier, the one that we're here to consider today. And it's for that reason that the board's enforcement work group got together in consultation with the agency staff and compiled this list and developed these proposed guidelines. And this was some valuable experience for the TDLR staff because this gave us an opportunity to understand the settings in which fitters work, the context in which they interact with clients and patients and so forth, and the nature of their contact with those folks. So this was a pretty valuable lesson for us. And I wasn't there. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to come. I had another commitment. But I do know, judging by the work product, that there was some very thoughtful and very serious consideration given to compiling these. And so you can see the results of those efforts in the proposed guidelines. Okay, that's where they come from. That's why we have them, and that's why we're here this morning. Before we get into the specifics of these guidelines, the proposed guidelines, let me talk for just a minute about how they're used and the benefits they provide to both TDLR and license applicants and licensees. It probably goes without saying that the legislature created regulatory agencies for a variety of reasons, but chief among those reasons is public protection, consumer protection, public safety, those kind of things. And of course, one way we can achieve those goals is by limits on occupational licensing to people who we think will honor those principles and abide by those goals, that we won't have to worry about them. Well, the fitters statute, that 402.501, kind of goes along with that too, because it authorizes the denial of a license when a person engages in conduct likely to harm the public. And I understand that relates probably more to professional competency, but still it's with that view toward public protection, public safety. And then you have those other provisions in that section that do the same. But for our purposes, we're especially wary of persons who have criminal convictions. When we review at license applications and when we review applications for renewal of licenses and so forth. We screen all of those very carefully for criminal convictions. And we especially look for those convictions that are in the criminal conviction guidelines that would lead to a denial or revocation of a license. We look at those general provisions. We're going to also, of course, now look at 402.501 because we have that as another consideration that we have to think about. Note on both of these, however, in 53.021A and then also in 402.501, these statutes authorize, they don't require, but they authorize the denial or revocation of a license if there's a criminal conviction that's listed in the guidelines or one of those others that we talked about. You know, there's an old saying that says, good judgment comes from experience, and a lot of that comes from bad judgment. You know, we make mistakes. I have to be honest with you, I've got a checkered past myself. I got a speeding ticket in 1995. And I maybe shouldn't be driving anymore because of that. But DPS says, just don't do it anymore. You know, they just say, just drive safely. And they let me keep my driver's license and so forth. And it's kind of the way it is with occupational licensing. I don't mean to make light of it or anything like that, but it's kind of the same way. Just because a person has a conviction, a criminal conviction on a person's record, doesn't mean that person's automatically disqualified from eligibility for a license. Even if it's a guideline crime, even if it's one of these others that in that list that we talked about earlier. Nothing is automatic. We review these things carefully on a case-by-case basis, and we consider a lot of different things like how long ago was the crime committed, how old was the person when the person committed the crime, what has the person done since then, what kind of a record has that person established. There are a number of different things. Let me give you an example, or a couple of examples. We license electricians. Now suppose we have an electrician license, a license applicant, who had a DWI last year. Well, that's not a guideline crime. It's not one of these others. So it wouldn't affect that license application at all. Excuse me. However, we also have licensed tow truck operators. And if a tow truck operator had a recent DWI, that's a different story because it is a guideline offense. And you can see the relationship between the operation of heavy equipment and somebody who's going to be drinking and driving. So that does make a difference. But scan back 10 years ago, and that's when the DWI was for the tow truck operator. It's had a clean record ever since then, had a good work record, had a good criminal record, everything's gone fine. Now it suddenly isn't really as important as it used to be. And chances are we'd probably approve that license because that person's gotten over that, it's behind them now. You know, we don't have any scarlet letters that we brand people for life and say, no, you can never have a license. So there are no automatic disqualifications, and even if we disqualify somebody or say they're ineligible for a license now, that doesn't mean it's forever. There's another one. Suppose you had an air conditioning and refrigeration technician applicant. See, there's a mouthful too. Who applies for a license. That person is 30 years old now, but was at 19 a shoplifter and got caught and got convicted. Well, theft is a guideline offense with air conditioning and refrigeration technicians, as it is with a lot of our occupations, because, you know, we want people to be honest. Would it matter because it's been so long ago now? No. If it was 10 months ago, well, that's a different story. But people can overcome these things, and those are just two examples of how we would do that. We look at them on a case-by-case basis before we make a decision. Now, I said something in that last example that leads me up to the next thing I want to talk about. There's another consideration for determining whether a person is eligible for a license. That factor is the honesty, trustworthiness, and integrity factor. And that comes from several different provisions in the law. You even have some in the 402.501. There's some references in that to honesty, trustworthiness, and integrity, and in more specific terms, not necessarily in those broad terms. But we have that, and we will consider convictions for crimes, things like false statements on an application. Of course, that's in your statute as well. Submitting false information to the department. All of those things, we roll it all up into one. It's all in one analysis. And then we determine, based on the whole picture, should this person have a license. And that's how we analyze these applications in view of the criminal conviction guidelines, the other considerations, and then this honesty, trustworthiness, and integrity factor. before we ever make a decision. Now, that's our process. We put everything together, and we do that when we screen the applicants. That works for us, but there's also a use to applicants, either current licensees who maybe have a conviction or people who want to apply for a license. These criminal conviction guidelines are posted in the Texas Register. More accessible, however, is that they're posted on our website so that anyone who wants to look at these can see those. And they can tell, well, you know, maybe my checkered past is probably too bad to really apply for something. Or they can look at it and say, hey, I don't have any of that stuff. I'll probably be a good candidate for a license. So they have that reference that they can look to. There's probably an easier way for them if they want to, and this is one more way that these guidelines fit in, and that's if the people want kind of an advanced determination of whether they're eligible for a license. They can write us a letter, they can or make an application and say, you know what, I'm thinking about getting a license. Can you tell me whether I would be disqualified because of my criminal convictions? And we'll give them, we call it a criminal history evaluation letter. And we'll write that letter, we'll look at their record, and we'll give them a preliminary determination of what we think what would happen. Now, of course, it could change, depending on how much more information we get during the actual screening process. But that's another use for these guidelines, is to give people an advanced determination on whether they might be eligible for a license. If you had a person who was just released from prison for doing 5 years for fraud, for example, and wanted to be a fitter, and supposing that these guidelines, these proposed guidelines had been adopted, you'll notice that the fraud or deceptive trade practice convictions, that's a guideline crime in here. So a person like that could look at that and say, well, maybe I should drive a truck for a while, or something else, until that person can establish a good record and maybe then come back to it later after the person proves that, no, I'm not going to do that kind of stuff anymore. Well, okay. Before we turn to the actual proposed guidelines themselves, do any of you have any questions about any of this stuff that we just talked about? Look, if you do, just jump in and interrupt me. I'm used to that.
This is Jackie Cooper. I have a quick question.
Certainly.
You've talked about different convictions, et cetera, on an applicant's record, and you've used the term after a while or with some time. That may not be a big thing anymore. Do you have any more specific, like after how long does it not become an issue, or is it generally just up to the committee's best judgment? So say, for example, if they were convicted 9 years ago versus 2 years ago, is there any type of a number that you guys look at as far as how long it's been?
I wish we had a bright line standard. That would make things so much easier. There's an element of subjectivity to this. And here's the reason why. I talked about some pretty easy examples, but we rarely ever get those easy examples. The ones that we're looking at, you might have one with a conviction last month, and then the most recent conviction was 15 years ago, or it might have been 15 months ago, or the most recent 2 convictions might have been 15 months ago, and the one before that might have been 2 years ago, or you might have a string of them, and they're 2 to 3 years apart, or maybe 5 years apart. And you've got all of these convictions, but you can't look at it and say, well, here's the pattern. Every 5 years, well, I mean, you can. Every 5 years he gets a conviction. Let's wait until the 6th year and see if he doesn't get any more convictions. It requires a measure of prescience that we don't really have. We just have to kind of wing it as we go and take our best analytical judgment and say, this person in these circumstances, these types of crimes, and given the frequency, what's the likelihood this person is going to keep doing that? I can tell you that when the criminal activity stops 10 or 15 years ago, and I'm sorry to use that in the disjunctive there, but quite a while back, and there hasn't been anything, the person's had a good record, maybe the person offers some letters of recommendation from people in the community, from employers or prospective employers, maybe even the sheriff. We get letters from law enforcement people from time to time. That helps them. The further back it is, the better they're doing and have been doing since then, the more likely they are to get a license. That's probably about as precise as I can get on a timeline, and I wish I could be more precise about that, but unfortunately, like I said, it's a case-by-case basis, so it's almost impossible to say.
Gary Hahn, I had a quick question. As we transition into from DSHS to TDLR, the people that have been licensed under 402, and they've had past and backgrounds, I mean, should they feel fairly confident that as it transitions into TDLR that they'll have a license, or how does all that work?
They will. We're going to put 100% confidence in the decisions that were made by DSHS before those licensees got here. Now, that's not to say that once they were licensed, once they got their most previous renewal, and then let's say they got a bank robbery conviction, well, all bets are off. You know, we'll look at that, obviously. But no, if they've been licensed and you haven't had any problem with them up to this point, then we're not going to have any problem with them either.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Okay, well, then let's turn to these proposed guidelines for just a minute. And again, a hearty thank you to the work group for all the work you put into these. You might notice that these aren't categorized by specific crimes, but rather by specific types of crimes. We found that if we try to list specific crimes, well, the county court in one county doesn't call it that. The district court in the next county won't call it that. And the court in Arkansas across the border might be the same thing, but they don't call it that either. And then you get to federal court and it's something altogether different. So we can't do that, not with any precision. So we just go with categories of crimes. And this first one is a good example. Crimes against the person such as homicide, kidnapping, and assault. And that's not an inclusive list. It kind of goes along with what I said a minute ago. It's just examples of what they might be comprised of. Okay, now as far as the reasons, as you might imagine, violence doesn't mix very well with people providing services in the public. We want people who are able to employ some conflict management skills. You know, anytime you're in the public, you're going to be dealing with people who are dissatisfied with service, dissatisfied with the bill, or there can be those occasions when tempers flare. And we don't want people who would react violently. Now, if it's ancient history, like I said a minute ago, it's probably not going to make any difference to us. But if it's something that's been recent, or if it's something that's been recurring, then it's something that we're going to be taking a close look at. Any questions on that one? Is that? All right. The next one is the crimes involving prohibited sexual conduct. And this is a fairly common, well, both of these previous two are fairly common categories of crimes that appear on our criminal conviction guidelines for other occupations as well. Sexual assault, indecency with a child, public lewdness, other kinds of sexually deviant behavior, they would all fall under this category. We don't want people who have a history of committing these types of crimes. We don't want to expose them to the patients and their caregivers and the other people involved in this industry and of course the people who are being serviced by it. So we try to screen out those people as well. And you'll see by number 3 on both of these occupations provide persons with this type of criminal history the opportunity to engage in further similar conduct. Well, they can, you know, especially for people who are kind of forceful with their intentions on not only on this but on some of the other things as well. The crimes that involve the children, the elderly, or the disabled as victims, I mean, we want to help those people who are not in a position to be able to help themselves necessarily, especially when you have somebody who's violent or forceful or they're imposing or something like that. So if there's a crime that involves this category of people, we want to be especially helpful or especially watchful for those, that we don't put somebody in a position to where they can commit crimes against them. We have the crimes against property, such as theft or burglary. We talked about that a few minutes ago. Well, licensees are going to have access to people's property. In some situations, they may not. But in a lot of other situations, they might. If they're in an office where they have access to, say, a patient's purse, or if they're in an assisted living facility, or some other place where they're going to have access to private, personal property. If you've got someone who is a committed thief, you do not want to put that person in there where they've got those advantages available to them. So we have that one on the list as well. We talked for a little bit about the fraud or deceptive trade practices category. Here you've got people who are billing clients, they're billing insurance companies, they're filing forms for the government for Medicaid, Medicare, government assistance benefits, and so forth. And so we want to make sure that they're done honestly. especially to protect the client and of course, to protect the public as well. Now, the last two, these are those crimes that are involved, or they involve illegal drugs and drug trafficking and being under the influence of alcohol. Probably not many people want a service provider, especially if somebody is involved in such an intricate operation as hearing fitters. They don't want them to be under the influence of alcohol or drugs or not involved in that kind of thing. Any kind of indication where these people are involved in that kind of activity can suggest that they are also going to have those things in their system, and they're not going to be at their best when they're performing in this industry. And so we want to be watchful that we don't have those people out here practicing a trade or a profession, I think is probably more accurate, that requires full attention and full intellect. So that's why those two are on there. Any questions on any of these?
With regard to the drug and alcohol, there's a wide range of misdemeanors to felonies there. Is there any kind of a breakdown on that, or?
It's kind of that same answer that I gave a minute ago. It depends case by case. If you've got somebody who's, every couple of months they're getting arrested for possession of marijuana or possession of cocaine or maybe even possession with intent to deliver, and that's probably the really bad end of it. And you can pretty well guess that, no, they're going to get excluded. You might have somebody who 3 years ago got arrested for possession of a small amount of cocaine or less than 2 ounces of marijuana. And, well, okay, that doesn't look like it's a trend or a pattern or something that's going to indicate a potential problem for this one person just based on those circumstances alone. So that's the other end of the spectrum. And then, of course, you have the in-between there, and that's where it gets difficult, that we have to make those decisions on where it falls in between there. I wish we had a bright line rule for that too, but unfortunately.
Yeah, and I guess it's really more within regard to probably the alcohol end of it, where you have people with, misdemeanors, and then you have, 3 convictions for DWI. I mean, there's no breakdown at all on that.
None other than just that case-by-case analysis. And the alcohol is, and some people don't realize this, but the alcohol is important too, because a lot of times the more violations there are, the greater the signal that there's a problem there, and the person may well be continuing the use of alcohol during times when it's not so noticeable by the police. Well, listen, thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate it. And we would ask that you vote on this and that you approve these and recommend to the Commission of Licensing and Regulation that they approve them as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any discussion? Entertain a motion?
I move to accept the criminal conviction guidelines for hearing instrument fitters and dispensers as written.
And a second?
Second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
So carried. Okay, we'll now move to item G, update from work groups and possible recommendation. How are we going to do this? We'll hear from enforcement work group first.
I think we've, Mary Winston kind of summarized the work from the enforcement work group
Okay.
with Ken's presentation.
Right.
I don't think that enforcement has anything else to add. I'm
Okay.
getting head
You gonna
shakes
hit it?
no.
All right. Okay, how about the licensing work group?
Licensing work group has not met yet. We're still marching towards October. E&E work group, with their report, we don't have any, we have some work that's coming up,
Okay.
but we're not yet ready for a report.
Gotcha.
And we've discussed standard of care before. We're not even going to broach that subject until the transition has been completed after the October 3rd date. So with enforcement's presentation, I think we have covered all updates on work groups at this time.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move to item H, recommendations for agenda items for next board meeting.
Speaking of work groups, Mary Winston again. I know that there's some work that's going to be going on this afternoon with education examination. And that may be something that we would definitely want to include just as a work group update. So I don't know that we would need a specific item for that.
Okay.
I've also just received a message from compliance that Stephen Mills' first date is not June 1st, it is June 15th. Thank you, Yvonne.
Okay.
So we will get him a little later than we anticipated, but he's still coming. Does the board have any other topics that they would like to add other than more in-depth work group updates? Maybe something else from enforcement and definitely something from education examination. Can't think of anything else on this end. Is there something else? And I want to tell you, if there's something you think of when you leave here, you can definitely let us know, and we can add it at that time. That does happen from time to time. As long as it's added before our posting deadline, it's completely fine.
Are there any from board members? Okay, thank you. We're going to move to item I, discussion of date, time, and location of next board meeting. I think we already did that. Last meeting, I've got next meeting being August 17th at 10 o'clock.
That is correct.
Is that correct? Okay. And item J, we are adjourned.